Hi y'all. This is not another video focused on the latest unexpected, tragic, and horrific things that keep happening almost like clockwork. But I still want to remind you of what I said in the last few videos. First, remember that these events and our reaction to these events create and reinforce patterns. Second, we can change our patterns and our habits. However, and this is the third point, we have to not get distracted. I'm not saying we ignore everything that's happening. We can't do that. What I am saying is that we need to keep our priorities straight. In order to keep our priorities straight, we need to be clear about what's important and why it's important. If your goal is to create a safer society, don't get distracted by the noise someone else is making. Focus on the steps that bring you closer to your goal. I personally tend to be pretty goal-oriented. In fact, for a long time, when I was several decades younger and long before I did any yoga, I was very focused on setting and achieving life goals. But then, when I achieved some of my big career goals, long before I anticipated, I kind of floundered. The age-old question of what's next didn't seem to apply. To be clear, it's not that the question didn't apply, it's just that I didn't have a lot of experience applying it. Around that same time, I started practicing yoga and other forms of meditation. The more I learned about philosophies like yoga and Buddhism, the more I got attached to ideas like non-grasping and non-attachment. Yeah, the irony of being human and habitually dualistic. My point is, I stopped setting long-term goals, which meant that on a certain level, I stopped setting short-term goals, and therefore I stopped achieving certain things. Born today in 1840, the poet Thomas Hardy once wrote a poem about a man who noticed such things. And while I had noticed that I stopped setting goals and that doing so was slightly problematic, I didn't really feel a sense of urgency around changing the habit. Truth be told, I didn't really know what I wanted in a quantitative sense, so I didn't see the point in setting such goals. I was just going with the flow, if you will. My perspective recently changed, however, and it changed for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons being a podcast called Strictly Cheer. Now, keep in mind as we move forward that this is the video I had planned to post 9 days ago. And I'm posting now despite some recent headlines out of California. Maybe if I'd have a different take if I were heavily invested in the cheer world. But I was never a cheerleader. Neither have I been a big cheerleading fan. I mean, I think cheerleaders are incredible athletes, but up until recently, I wasn't particularly interested in watching cheerleading just for the sake of watching cheerleading. Then I saw some videos of the stunts people are doing these days. Holy cow. While some people get excited about the flyers, I was really fascinated by the physics and physicality needed to be the base. And there was this one base in particular whose work ethic really intrigued me. It turns out this base is the host and creator of the podcast Strictly Cheer. There are not yet a lot of episodes, and for all intents and purposes, Gage Strickland is pretty young. But wisdom isn't restricted to the old, and there's a good amount of wisdom in these short episodes. For instance, the third episode is entitled Changing the Mindset, Create Your Dartboard. And in it, Gage Strickland talks about the importance of setting stunt goals in order to achieve stunt goals. The metaphor of the dartboard made me think about the meaning of Siddhartha. Siddhartha is, of course, Gautama Buddha, as well as several kings and warriors in Indian poetry and other sacred texts. In Ayurveda and other medicinal sciences, it's also the name of certain plants, including a mustard seed, which is itself a very common and relevant metaphor. Finally, Siddhartha is the chosen name of Hayden Sid Finch. In the 1985 Sports Illustrated article about Sid Finch, George Plimpton defines Siddhartha as meaning aim attained or the perfect pitch. A more literal translation would be a perfected being with a specific purpose, or someone who has intentionally and purposefully achieved a high degree of physical and spiritual perfection. For some reason, thinking about Siddhartha in the context of that Strictly Cheer episode shifted my focus from the dartboard to the thrower. Think about it. When we set goals, we're usually focused on the end result, the dartboard. However, if we were truly playing darts, we would focus on cause and conditions. We would focus on our stance and our form. If we were really into it, we would also focus on the type of darts we were using, i.e. the weight and material, as well as the line, meaning where we're standing and how far we have to throw. We might even start a little closer to the board and then back away a little bit as we get more proficient, which is essentially adjusting the space of possibility that I mentioned in the last video. Another thing we would do, and this is something that Gage Strickland highlights but doesn't really get into in the third episode, is that we would show up and practice. We would keep doing the things that allow us to consistently expand our space of possibility and to hit our goals. It's kind of like how when we're practicing yoga, consistently practicing certain poses enables us to eventually practice other poses. It's also kind of like how I keep posting these videos every 9 days. If you know me, you know I can be quite literal. So I'm going to suggest that you literally draw a dartboard, or maybe use a picture of a dartboard as your starting point. Either way, place a goal in the center and then place some related or similar goals along the concentric circles. Now, draw a line that represents the space between you now and your goals. That's how you define your space of possibility. Place a few hash marks on the line, and starting with this hash closest to your circles, note the steps it would take to hit any of your goals if you were standing right in front of your dartboard, meaning you had all the means necessary and required no skill, finesse, or follow-through. You might even make a note of which part of the circles you can hit from that spot. Continue making notes along each hash mark until you reach the end of the line, and now you've created a plan, a really practical plan of action. I'm willing to bet you can do that in the next 9 days.